The congressional hearing room fell silent as prominent lawyer and government official Merrick Garland leaned into his microphone, his face red with indignation. "Pastor Osteen, what you just said is a complete fabrication," he declared, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You are lying to the American people, and I will not sit here and allow it." But Joel Osteen, the pastor, television preacher, businessman, and author, didn't even flinch. Instead, a small smile played at the corner of his lips as he reached for a manila folder that had been sitting quietly on his desk throughout his testimony. What happened in the next 30 seconds would send shockwaves through Washington and leave one of the most powerful figures in recent American legal history completely speechless. This wasn't just another congressional hearing. This was the moment a renowned 62-year-old pastor, television preacher, businessman, and author was about to expose decades of carefully hidden truths that Merrick Garland thought would never see the light of day. The evidence he was about to reveal wouldn't just challenge public trust in Garland's past actions, it would threaten his entire legacy. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of these game-changing public showdowns. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and let's get into the story that has Washington insiders calling this the most devastating public takedown in recent memory. Merrick Garland stood as a titan of the Washington establishment. As a prominent lawyer and government official for decades, having served in various high-profile roles including Attorney General, he was known for his formidable legal mind, his master of constitutional interpretation, and someone who had navigated the treacherous waters of Washington politics for over 4 decades. A Harvard-educated lawyer with a resume that read like a who's who of government service and legal circles, Garland had faced down senators, representatives, and intense public scrutiny. He was known for his unflappable demeanor, his ability to deflect tough questions with legal jargon, and his fierce loyalty to the rule of law as he interpreted it. Standing across from him in this David versus Goliath matchup was Joel Osteen, a prominent public figure not typically found in such confrontational political arenas. At 62, he brought a different kind of energy to the discussion, one forged in years of ministry, public speaking to millions, and managing a large organization. Unlike many who came from political dynasties or Ivy League legal backgrounds, Osteen had built his reputation on inspiring hope and leading a successful enterprise. He knew what it was like to communicate effectively with vast audiences, and he had spent years understanding how to present information to move people and how to utilize a strong team for meticulous research. This wasn't just about 2 individuals in a hearing room. This confrontation represented something much bigger, a clash between the established power of Washington and a prominent voice from outside the traditional political sphere, demanding accountability. The hearing was ostensibly about examining the Justice Department's handling of investigations during a previous administration, but everyone in that room knew it was really about something else. The truth about what really happened behind closed doors during some of the most controversial moments in recent American history. For Garland, this hearing, where he was called to speak on his long career in public service, was meant to reinforce his reputation for integrity and meticulous legal work. He had come prepared with carefully crafted statements, expecting the usual inquiries into complex legal matters. What he didn't expect was for someone to have done their homework, really done their homework, and uncovered documents that were supposed to have been buried forever. For Osteen, this was his moment to prove that he wasn't just another public figure who could be dismissed by Washington's power players. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with his team late into the night, following paper trails that others had abandoned, and building a presentation that would thoroughly expose the truth. He knew that taking on someone like Garland meant risking his public standing and potentially alienating segments of his audience. The establishment didn't take kindly to those who embarrassed its members, but he also knew that sometimes the truth was worth that risk, regardless of personal cost. The hearing room was packed with reporters, cameras, and political operatives from both parties. C-SPAN's cameras rolled, capturing every moment for history. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation, with hashtags like #GarlandHearing and #OsteenExposes beginning to trend. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen, but nobody could have predicted just how explosive the next few hours would be. The hearing had been proceeding relatively smoothly for the first hour. Garland had deflected inquiries from several committee members with his trademark combination of legal expertise and carefully worded responses. I would need to review the specific context of that decision, had become his refrain, delivered with just enough gravitas to sound believable while avoiding any real accountability. Then it was Pastor Osteen's turn to present his perspective. He adjusted his microphone, took a sip of water, and looked directly at Garland with an intensity that made several people in the gallery lean forward. "Mr. Garland," he began, his voice clear and steady, "in your previous statements and testimony to this committee, you stated that you had no knowledge of any undue pressure being applied to sensitive investigations involving politically connected figures. Is that still your position?" Garland shifted slightly in his seat, his expression unchanged. "Pastor Osteen, as I've stated multiple times, the decisions made were based purely on legal principles in the pursuit of justice." "That's interesting," Osteen replied, pulling out a document from his folder, "because I have here an email dated February 11th, 2020 from a senior prosecutor involved in a particularly sensitive investigation. Would you like me to read what it says?" The color began to drain from Garland's face, but he maintained his composure. "I'm not aware of what email you're referring to, Pastor Osteen. There are many communications during that time." Osteen continued, his voice gaining strength. "This email, Mr. Garland, states, and I quote, 'The Attorney General's office has made it clear that the recommendation needs to be adjusted. This is coming directly from the top.' Does that refresh your memory?" Garland leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Pastor Osteen, you're taking things out of context. The Justice Department regularly reviews recommendations." "Out of context?" Osteen interrupted, something flashing in his eyes. "Mr. Garland, reports indicate multiple career professionals withdrew from that investigation. These weren't political appointees. These were career professionals who had served under multiple administrations. Are you telling this committee that their withdrawals were just a coincidence?" The room had gone completely quiet except for the sound of cameras clicking. Every eye was on Garland, waiting for his response. He took a breath, his legal mind clearly working to find an escape route. "Pastor Osteen, I understand you are not accustomed to the nuances of legal proceedings, but these types of inflammatory accusations without proper foundation—" "Inflammatory?" Osteen's voice rose slightly. "Mr. Garland, I'm not making accusations. I'm reading from documents that your former colleagues provided to this committee. If I could, With a degree of irony, Osteen said, "Are you calling them liars?" This was when Garland made his fatal mistake. Perhaps it was frustration, perhaps it was arrogance, or perhaps it was simply that he had been in power so long that he had forgotten what it was like to be genuinely challenged by someone so unexpected. Whatever the reason, he leaned into his microphone and spoke the words that would seal his fate. "Pastor Osteen, what you're doing here is exactly what I'd expect from someone with your limited experience in legal and governmental oversight. You're lying. You're fabricating evidence to sensationalize the situation. And frankly, it's beneath the dignity of this institution." The gasps from the gallery were audible. Several Democratic members of the committee looked shocked while Republicans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The chairman raised his gavel, but before he could speak, Osteen held up his hand. "Mr. Garland," he said, his voice now deadly calm, "did you just accuse me of lying? Did you just suggest that I would fabricate evidence?" Garland, perhaps realizing he had gone too far, but unable to back down, doubled down. "I'm stating that what you're presenting is a misrepresentation of facts. And yes, I believe you know it's a misrepresentation. If that makes you a liar, then so be it." The room erupted. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. But through it all, Osteen sat perfectly still, that small smile returning to his face. He reached for another folder, this one thicker than the first, and when he opened it, several committee members could see it was filled with what appeared to be official Justice Department documents, complete with stamps and signatures. "Mr. Chairman," Osteen said, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the chaos, "I'd like to request a brief recess. It seems Mr. Garland needs a moment to reconsider his accusation, especially once he sees what I'm about to present to this committee." The chairman, a veteran Democrat who had seen his share of political theater, recognized the moment for what it was. "The committee will take a 15-minute recess," he announced, banging his gavel once more. As people began to stand and stretch, the real action was happening at the witness table. Garland's attorney had rushed over, whispering urgently in his ear. Several Republican committee members had also gathered around, their faces showing concern. On the other side of the room, Osteen was approached by members of the committee, as well as his own staff and advisors. But he wasn't celebrating. Instead, he was methodically organizing his documents, preparing for what everyone now knew would be a devastating second act. The media section was in overdrive. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones, sending out alerts and updates. Breaking. Garland accuses Pastor Osteen of lying in heated exchange, flashed across news websites. Social media exploded with reactions with #Garland meltdown and #Osteen has receipts beginning to trend. Cable news networks cut into their regular programming to show clips of the confrontation. But perhaps the most telling sign of what was to come was the behavior of Garland himself. The man who had walked into the hearing room with supreme confidence now sat hunched over the witness table, reading through notes with his attorney. His face, which had been red with indignation just minutes before, was now pale. Several times he could be seen shaking his head as if in disbelief. Meanwhile, Osteen stood by the window, looking out at the Washington Monument in the distance. An aide approached him with a phone, apparently showing him something on the screen. He nodded, said a few words, and then returned to organizing his documents. There was no celebration, no gloating, just the focused preparation of someone who knew they were about to change history. As the recess continued, whispers began to circulate through the hearing room. Reporters who had been covering Washington for decades were comparing notes, trying to figure out what he might have. "I heard he got documents from a whistleblower," one reporter whispered to another. "No, my source says it's emails that were supposed to have been deleted," another replied. "Whatever it is, look at Garland. I've never seen him like this," a third added. Indeed, Garland's transformation was remarkable. The man who had navigated complex legal challenges, who had weathered intense scrutiny over sensitive decisions, who had stood firm against accusations of partisanship, now looked genuinely worried. Several times he could be seen pulling out his phone, apparently trying to reach someone, but each time he would put it away without making a call. The Republican committee members were also showing signs of concern. Several could be seen having hushed conversations with lots of concerned glances toward both Garland and Osteen. One senior Republican was overheard saying, "We need to know what he has before this continues." But Osteen wasn't sharing his cards with anyone. He sat at his desk calm and composed, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. As when others tried to approach him, he would politely but firmly indicate that he needed to focus. This was his moment, and he wasn't going to let anything distract him from what was about to come. When Chairman Johnson gave the hearing back to order, the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally changed. What had started as a routine oversight hearing had transformed into must-see public theater. Every major news network was now carrying the hearing live with breaking news banners, scrolling across the bottom of screens nationwide. "Mr. Garland," Osteen began, his voice carrying a different quality now. Not aggressive, but confident, like an advocate who knows they have already won the argument. "Before the break, you accused me of lying and fabricating evidence. I want to give you one opportunity to retract that statement." Garland had clearly been coached during the break. His response was more measured, though his jaw remained tight. "Pastor Osteen, I stand by my assertion that your characterization of events is inaccurate and misleading." Osteen nodded slowly. "Very well, Mr. Chairman. I would like to enter into the record a series of documents that I believe will clarify exactly who is being inaccurate and misleading in this hearing." He lifted the thick folder, and the sound of cameras clicking filled the room like rainfall. "Let's start with this," Osteen said, pulling out a document and placing it on the desk in front of him. "This is a memo dated January 30th, 2020, from your personal files, Mr. Garland. A memo that, according to established government procedures, should have been preserved, but somehow never made it into the official record. Would you like me to read it to the committee?" Garland's attorney immediately objected. "Mr. Chairman, we haven't had the opportunity to review these alleged documents." "Alleged?" Osteen interjected. "Mr. Chairman, these documents were obtained through proper FOIA requests and whistleblower disclosures. They are authenticated with Mr. Garland's own signature. Unless Mr. Garland is now claiming he didn't sign his own memos." The chairman looked at Garland. "Mr. Garland, are you disputing the authenticity of your signature?" Garland was trapped, and everyone in the room knew it. If he disputed the signature, he would be opening himself up to potential forensic examination that could prove him wrong. If he didn't dispute it, he was confirming the document was real. "I would need to see the document in question," Garland said carefully. Osteen smiled. Of course. He had an aide deliver a copy to Garland's table. The entire room watched as Garland examined the document, his face growing paler with each passing second. "While Mr. Garland reviews that," Osteen continued, Let me tell the American people what this document says. In his own handwriting, Mr. Garland wrote, spoke with senior official about sensitive investigation. He wants it handled delicately. Need to find a way to reduce public scrutiny without appearing to intervene directly. The room erupted. Committee members were talking over each other. Reporters were shouting questions, and the chairman was banging his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Through it all, Garland sat frozen, the document still in his hands. But wait, Osteen said, raising his voice above the chaos. There's more. Over the next 10 minutes, Osteen methodically presented document after document, each one more damaging than the last. A text message exchanged between Garland and a senior White House official discussing how to manage the narrative around a politically charged report before it was released. An email where Garland explicitly instructed subordinates to find ways to support certain politically sensitive positions on various investigations. A digital recording, yes, a recording of a phone call where Garland could be heard saying, "I don't care what the career staff think. This is what needs to happen." With each revelation, Garland seemed to shrink further into his chair. His attorney had stopped objecting, apparently realizing that every objection only drew more attention to the devastating evidence being presented. "Mr. Garland," Osteen said, his voice now sharp as a blade, "you sat there and called me a liar. You accused me of fabricating evidence, but every single document I've presented today has your signature, your voice, or your explicit authorization. So I ask you again, who exactly is lying to the American people?" Garland finally found his voice, though it lacked the authority it had carried just an hour earlier. "Pastor Osteen, these documents are being taken completely out of context. A high-ranking government official has the constitutional authority to what, Mr. Garland?" Osteen interrupted. "To interfere in sensitive legal matters involving his friends? To use the mechanisms of justice as his personal tool? Because that's what these documents show. And you know what's most interesting about these documents, Mr. Garland?" He paused, letting the tension build. "They were all created after you testified to Congress that no such interference ever occurred, which means you didn't just lie to Congress once. You lied repeatedly under oath while serving in a position of public trust." But Osteen wasn't done. He had saved the most devastating evidence for last. "Mr. Chairman, I have one final document to present. This one is particularly interesting because it's not from Mr. Garland's recent time in a high-profile role. This one goes back to an earlier tenure in a high-ranking legal position under a previous administration." Garland's head snapped up, genuine surprise flickering across his face for the first time. "You see," Osteen continued, "Mr. Garland has a pattern. This document from 1992 shows him engaging in exactly the same behavior. Political interference in sensitive legal matters, misleading Congress, and then covering it up. The only difference is that back then, we didn't have emails and text messages to prove it. We just had good old-fashioned memos like this one where Garland wrote, 'Congress doesn't need to know everything we do. Executive privilege covers a multitude of sins.'" He looked directly at Garland. "A multitude of sins, Mr. Garland. Your words, not mine." What happened next was something that veteran Washington observers would talk about for years. Merrick Garland, the man who had weathered every political storm, who had faced down special counsels and hostile senators, who had built a reputation as an unflappable defender of justice, simply sagged in his seat, his eyes unfocused. And when he looked up again, something had changed. The defiance was gone, replaced by what looked remarkably like defeat. "Pastor Osteen," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, causing everyone to lean in to hear. I would like to consult with my counsel." "Of course, Mr. Garland," Osteen replied, his voice now surprisingly gentle. "But before you do, I want you and everyone in this room to understand something. This isn't about partisan politics. This isn't about scoring points. This is about the integrity of our government and the public's trust. When a high-ranking government official, a lawyer, lies to Congress, when he corrupts the principles of justice for political purposes, he doesn't just betray his oath. He betrays every American who believes in the rule of law." He began gathering his documents, stacking them neatly as he continued. "You called me a liar, Mr. Garland, but these documents, your documents, tell the real story. And that story is one of a government official who forgot that his loyalty was supposed to be to the Constitution and the principles of justice, not to any political agenda." As Garland huddled with his attorney, the hearing room buzzed with an energy that was part shock, part excitement, and part disbelief. Committee members from both parties were struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Several Republicans who had been prepared to defend Garland were now notably silent, while Democrats were trying not to appear too triumphant. The chairman, recognizing the historic nature of what had just occurred, made a decision. Given the serious nature of the evidence presented, this committee will need time to review these documents thoroughly. Mr. Garland, you remain under oath, and we will be calling you back for further testimony. This hearing is recessed until further notice. As the gavel came down, the room exploded into motion. Reporters rushed toward both Garland and Osteen, shouting questions. Garland's security detail quickly surrounded him, escorting him out through a side door, his attorney following close behind. The image of Garland fleeing the hearing room, because that's what it looked like, a flight, would become one of the defining images of the entire affair. Osteen, in contrast, remained at his seat for a moment, allowing himself a brief moment of quiet resolve. When he finally stood to leave, he was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and reporters, but he simply smiled and said, "The documents speak for themselves. The American people deserve the truth, and today they got it." Within seconds of the hearing's dramatic conclusion, social media went into overdrive. Osteen exposes. Garland shot to the #1 trending topic worldwide. The clip of Garland calling Osteen a liar, followed by his systematic demolition of Garland's credibility, was shared millions of times within the first hour. Twitter users were particularly creative with their responses. "Joel Osteen just gave a masterclass in moral courage," one user wrote, garnering hundreds of thousands of likes. "Garland really thought he could intimidate a pastor and public figure known for his calm demeanor. Sir, Osteen has dealt with global audiences and intense scrutiny before his morning coffee," another viral tweet read. The memes came fast and furious. Someone created a video putting Osteen's takedown to dramatic music from a superhero movie. Another edited together every time Garland's expression changed as new evidence was presented, set to the sound of the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme. But beyond the humor and celebration from Osteen's supporters, there was also serious discussion about the implications of what had been revealed. Legal experts were appearing on every news channel discussing the potential criminal implications of Garland's exposed lies to Congress. The phrase perjury charges was being thrown around with increasing frequency. Within hours of the hearing's conclusion, the political landscape in Washington had shifted dramatically. The first sign of how serious the situation had become came when 3 Republican senators who had previously defended Garland released statements distancing themselves from him. Senator Johnson from Wisconsin, a longtime Garland supporter, released a carefully worded statement. "The evidence presented today raises serious questions that demand answers. No one is above the law, regardless of their position or party affiliation." Even more telling was the silence from others who would normally rush to Garland's defense. The president's press secretary, when asked about the hearing, simply said, "We're reviewing the testimony and have no comment at this time." For an administration that typically fought back against every accusation, this silence was deafening. Meanwhile, Democratic leadership was trying to contain their excitement while pushing for immediate action. Speaker of the House Martinez held an emergency press conference, announcing that the House would be opening a formal investigation into Garland's testimony with potential referrals to the Justice Department for perjury charges. "What we witnessed today was not just the exposure of lies," Martinez said, "but a pattern of potential corruption at high levels of our justice system. This cannot and will not be ignored." By the evening, the Justice Department found itself in an impossible position. The current Attorney General, Sandra Phillips, released a statement saying that the department would review the evidence presented and take appropriate action if warranted. But everyone understood the unprecedented nature of what that might mean. The Justice Department potentially prosecuting a former high-ranking official for crimes committed while in office. Legal experts were having a field day analyzing the potential charges. On CNN, former federal prosecutor Jennifer Rodriguez laid out the case. Based on what Pastor Osteen presented, you're looking at potential charges of perjury, obstruction of Congress, and possibly obstruction of justice. Each of these carries significant prison time. Fox News, which had initially tried to defend Garland, found itself in an awkward position as more conservative legal experts acknowledged the seriousness of the evidence. "Look, I've defended Merrick Garland many times," said conservative commentator Mark Stevens. "But if these documents are authentic, and he didn't deny they were, then we have a serious problem." While Garland was huddled with his legal team, Joel Osteen was having a moment of profound public impact. His organization was flooded with calls from supporters, religious leaders, and media requests from around the world. The pastor, television preacher, businessman, and author, who some had dismissed as too removed from political battles to take on Washington's power players, had just taken down one of the most formidable figures in modern American politics. That evening, he appeared on Rachel Maddow's show for an exclusive interview. Maddow, barely containing her excitement, asked the question everyone wanted to know. How did you get these documents? Osteen's response was measured and careful. Rachel, there are a lot of good people in government who believe in the rule of law. When they see corruption and lies, they want the truth to come out. My team simply provided a vehicle for that truth. But you knew what you had when you walked into that hearing, Maddow pressed. Why let him attack you first? Why let him call you a liar? Osteen smiled. Because I needed the American people to see who he really is. If I had just presented the documents, it might have been dismissed as another partisan attack. But when he attacked me, when he called me a liar while he was the one who had been misrepresenting the truth all along, that revealed his character in a way no document alone could. The interview was watched by millions, and Osteen's calm, methodical explanation of how he had built his case only enhanced his growing reputation. By the end of the night, he had gained over 1 million new followers on social media, and public observers were already speculating about his future. Global moral leader Osteen, influential public advocate Osteen, the possibilities seemed endless for his impact. Behind closed doors, Republican leadership was in crisis mode. Garland had been one of their most respected legal figures, someone they had held up as a paragon of legal thinking. Now they had to figure out how to distance themselves from him without admitting they had been wrong to defend him for so long. The most dramatic moment came when a senior senator, a longtime Garland supporter, was caught on a hot mic saying to a colleague, "We should have seen this coming. The signs were there, but we ignored them because he was one of our most respected legal minds." And this accidental admission sent shockwaves through political media. Talk radio hosts who had spent years defending Garland were suddenly trying to explain why they hadn't questioned his obvious misrepresentations. "We trusted him," one prominent host said on air. "He betrayed that trust." But others in the conservative movement saw an opportunity. A group of younger Republicans released a statement calling for a new generation of conservative leadership that puts principles over personalities. They specifically praise Osteen for his commitment to transparency and accountability, values that should transcend party lines. 3 days after the hearing, another bombshell dropped. 2 whistleblowers from within the Justice Department came forward publicly, revealing they had been the sources of many of the documents presented by Pastor Osteen. Both were career prosecutors who had served under multiple administrations, and their decision to go public added even more credibility to the evidence. In a joint interview with 60 Minutes, they explained their decision. "We took an oath to uphold the Constitution," one said, her voice shaking with emotion. "When we saw that oath being violated by the very person who was supposed to be protecting it, we had to act." The second whistleblower, a veteran prosecutor with 30 years of experience, was even more direct. Merrick Garland corrupted the Department of Justice. He turned it into a political weapon. Pastor Osteen gave us the opportunity to expose that corruption, and we took it. Their revelation sparked a new round of discussions about whistleblower protections and the importance of government accountability. It also led to more current Justice Department employees coming forward with their own stories of political interference during Garland's tenure. 5 days after the hearing, Garland finally emerged from his silence with an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal attempting to defend himself. The piece, titled "The Truth About My Service," was a lengthy attempt to contextualize the documents Osteen had presented, but the op-ed fell flat. Fact-checkers immediately found multiple false statements within it, and even conservative publications that might have been sympathetic were critical. The National Review wrote, "Garland's defense reads like the desperate justifications of a man who knows he's been caught. It's time for him to stop digging." More damaging was the response from his former colleagues. Several former Justice Department officials who had worked with Garland released their own statements contradicting his version of events. One particularly devastating response came from his former deputy, who wrote, "I can no longer remain silent. The documents Pastor Osteen presented are accurate, and they represent only a fraction of the troubling behavior I witnessed." Beyond the immediate political and legal implications, the confrontation between Joel Osteen and Merrick Garland had a significant cultural impact. It became a symbol of how prominent public figures from outside the political establishment could challenge entrenched power structures and of the importance of preparation and evidence in fighting corruption. Universities started using the hearing as a case study in their ethics in public service classes. The Osteen disclosure became shorthand for meticulously presenting inconvenient truths to powerful opponents. People from all walks of life saw in Osteen an example of how to stand up to intimidation and false accusations, driven by a commitment to truth. The phrase, "but he drops evidence that ends him," became a rallying cry on social media, used whenever someone was fact-checking false claims or exposing hypocrisy. T-shirts with Osteen's picture and the words, "I brought receipts for the truth," became bestsellers. As the weeks passed, the political implications of the hearing continued to ripple outward. The Justice Department announced a comprehensive review of all prosecutorial decisions made during Garland's relevant tenure, potentially affecting dozens of cases. Several convictions that had been influenced by political pressure were being re-examined. More significantly, there was a bipartisan push for new legislation to protect the independence of the Justice Department. The Prosecutorial Independence Act, co-sponsored by Democrats and reform-minded Republicans, would make it a felony for any political appointee to interfere in specific prosecutorial decisions. Osteen himself became a leading voice in this reform movement. His follow-up discussions and public appearances on governmental independence drew massive audiences, and his ability to articulate complex issues in an accessible way, even finding common ground with some who genuinely wanted reform, showed a profound public influence. While Osteen's public influence was rising, Garland's world was collapsing. His speaking engagements were canceled, his book deal was withdrawn, and several corporate boards asked him to resign. The man who had once commanded high speaking fees was now persona non grata in most circles. More personally painful was the reaction from the legal community he had been part of for decades. Prestigious legal organizations, which had once celebrated him as a hero, quietly removed his name from their distinguished lists. His portrait at the Justice Department, which traditionally would have been displayed prominently, was relegated to a back hallway. Former friends and colleagues distanced themselves. One former Supreme Court clerk who had worked with Garland told a reporter, "The Merrick Garland exposed in that hearing is not the man I thought I knew. Either he changed or I was blind to who he really was. Either way, it's heartbreaking." The hearing also had international implications. Foreign governments that had been skeptical of American claims about the rule of law saw the hearing as evidence that the system could still work. The European Union's Justice Commissioner released a statement praising the courage of Pastor Osteen and the whistleblowers who ensured that truth prevailed over power. Conversely, authoritarian governments tried to use the scandal to their advantage. "American democracy is just as corrupt as any other system," wrote a Chinese state newspaper. But these attempts largely failed, as most international observers saw the exposure of Garland's lies as evidence that American democracy, while flawed, still had mechanisms for accountability. The hearing also forced a reckoning in the media. Many journalists who had taken Garland's statements at face value over the years had to grapple with their failure to dig deeper. "We gave him the benefit of the doubt when we shouldn't have," admitted one prominent political reporter on a journalism podcast. Pastor Osteen, with his team, did the investigative work we should have been doing. This led to a broader discussion about access journalism and the tendency of some reporters to avoid challenging powerful sources for fear of losing access. Several major newspapers announced new policies about fact-checking statements from government officials, regardless of their position or party. As his influence grew, Osteen was careful not to overplay his hand. He turned down most media requests, choosing his appearances carefully and always keeping the focus on reform rather than personal glory. When asked about his newfound role as a governmental accountability advocate, he consistently responded, "I'm focused on serving people and speaking truth wherever that may lead." But behind the scenes, he was building a powerful coalition for reform. He used his platform to champion causes for financial transparency, governmental ethics, and even found common ground with some Republicans on accountability measures, using his influence to bring people together. His team, which had always been formidable, was now flooded with resumes from top talent wanting to contribute to his new focus on governmental integrity. "We're not here to make noise," he told his team. "We're here to make change." 6 weeks after the hearing, the other shoe dropped. The Justice Department announced that it was opening a criminal investigation into Merrick Garland's testimony to Congress. The appointment of a special prosecutor, former Judge Maria Santos, signaled how seriously the department was taking the matter. Santos was known for her meticulous approach and her immunity to political pressure. Her appointment was praised by both parties, with even some of Garland's former allies acknowledging that she would conduct a fair investigation. Garland's legal team immediately went into overdrive, hiring some of the best white-collar defense attorneys in the country. The man who had once overseen prosecutions was now preparing his own defense. The irony was lost on no one. The Osteen-Garland confrontation became a catalyst for a broader reform movement within government. Other congressional committees began taking a harder look at testimony from former officials. Armed with the knowledge that documents and evidence could surface even years later, whistleblower protections were strengthened, and new secure channels were created for government employees to report wrongdoing. The Osteen Protocols, as they became known informally, established new standards for document preservation and transparency. Young people, inspired by Osteen's example, began flooding into public service. Law school applications surged with many applicants, specifically citing the hearing as their inspiration. He showed us that one person with courage and preparation can take on the entire system, wrote one applicant in their personal statement. A year after the hearing, its impact was still being felt. Garland was under indictment for perjury and obstruction of Congress, facing the possibility of significant prison time. His trial was scheduled to begin in 3 months, and legal experts predicted he would likely be convicted based on the evidence Osteen had presented. Osteen himself had become one of the most influential public voices for accountability, despite his non-political background. He launched a new initiative focused on government transparency and ethics, and his public advocacy directly led to 3 major pieces of reform legislation. There was constant speculation about his potential to inspire new political leaders or even his own indirect influence in elections, though he continued to deflect questions about direct political office. On the anniversary of the hearing, he delivered a powerful address, broadcast live on all major networks. "A year ago," he began, "I was called a liar by someone who had built his career on carefully constructed narratives. Today we have shown that truth, when backed by evidence and courage, will always triumph over deception and intimidation." He continued, "But our work is not done. There are still those who believe they are above the law, who think their power protects them from accountability. To them, I say, we are watching, we are documenting, and we will hold you accountable. The American people deserve nothing less." The confrontation between Joel Osteen and Merrick Garland would go down in history as one of the most dramatic and consequential congressional hearings of the 21st century. It changed how Congress conducted oversight, how the Justice Department operated, and how the American people viewed the possibility of holding powerful officials accountable. For Osteen, it was the beginning of what many predicted would be a historic era of public advocacy. He had shown that preparation, conviction, and an unwavering commitment to truth, even from outside the political establishment, could overcome even the most entrenched power structures. His example inspired a generation of young people to seek truth and accountability, believing they too could make a difference. For Garland, it was a complete fall from grace. The man who had once been considered one of the most respected lawyers and government officials in American history was now facing the possibility of dying in prison. His legacy, instead of being one of integrity and meticulous legal work, would forever be associated with the corruption, lies, and the day a pastor, television preacher, businessman, and author exposed him to the world. Even years later, the impact of that hearing continued to reverberate. The reforms it sparked had fundamentally changed how government operated. The culture of impunity that had allowed officials to lie to Congress without consequence was broken. The Osteen standard of disclosure became the benchmark for scrutinizing powerful figures, requiring thorough preparation and irrefutable documentary evidence. Law schools and ethics programs taught entire courses on the hearing, analyzing both the ethical implications and the public impact. The footage of Garland calling Osteen a liar, followed by his methodical destruction of Garland's credibility, became one of the most studied moments in modern public accountability. Political scientists wrote papers on how the hearing had shifted power dynamics in Washington. The old guard network that had protected people like Garland for decades had been exposed and weakened. New approaches to accountability, spearheaded by public figures like Osteen, were now at the forefront. Beyond all the political and legal implications, the hearing had shown something fundamental about human nature and the American system. It had shown that courage, when combined with preparation and evidence, could defeat arrogance and corruption. It had proven that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law when individuals were willing to fight for accountability. Joel Osteen had walked into that hearing room as a pastor, television preacher, businessman, and author who many had underestimated. He walked out as a champion of truth who had shown the entire country what was possible when someone refused to be intimidated. His courage inspired countless others to stand up to corruption and lies in their own lives and communities. Merrick Garland had walked into that hearing room believing his power and reputation would protect him from any real accountability. He had left it exposed as a liar and a corrupt official who had betrayed his oath of office. His fall served as a warning to others who might be tempted to abuse their power. The truth has a way of coming out, and when it does, no amount of power or prestige can protect you from the consequences. The story of Merrick Garland, accusing Joel Osteen of lying only to be destroyed by the evidence he presented, became more than just a political scandal. It became a morality tale for the modern age, a reminder that truth and justice, while sometimes delayed, cannot be permanently denied. For young people watching, it was proof that they could make a difference, that they didn't have to accept corruption and lies from those in power. For those in positions of authority, it was a warning that their actions would have consequences, that someone somewhere was keeping receipts for public trust. For the American democratic system, it was a moment of redemption, proof that the mechanisms of accountability, while sometimes slow and imperfect, still functioned when citizens had the courage to use them. The hearing had lasted only a few hours, but its impact would last for generations. It had shown that in the battle between truth and lies, between courage and intimidation, between evidence and empty accusations, truth backed by courage and evidence would always prevail. As we reflect on this historic confrontation, remember that democracy requires constant vigilance and courage from all of us. It requires people willing to stand up to power, to demand accountability, and to never accept lies no matter who tells them or how powerful they might be. The lesson of Joel Osteen versus Merrick Garland is simple but profound. Prepare thoroughly, stand courageously, and never let anyone's position or power intimidate you from speaking truth. Because in the end, as Osteen proved that day, truth-backed evidence is the most powerful weapon of all. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explosive public coverage and in-depth analysis of the moments that shape our democracy. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And comment below with your thoughts on this historic confrontation. Who do you think should be held accountable next? What other truths need to be exposed? Your voice matters, and together we can ensure that those in power are held to the same standards as everyone else. Remember, they may have the power, but we have the truth. And as Joel Osteen showed us all, sometimes that's all you need to change everything.